Hello, I'm Clancy Gates, and I'm going to be discussing St. James Parish in Louisiana and the embodied health movement that has been taking place there. So, St. James Parish, and a parish is just what they call counties in Louisiana, so it's basically St. James County, is located on the Mississippi River right between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, which are the two biggest cities in Louisiana. Historically, the region was really good for growing tobacco and was home to many plantations during the antebellum era. Today, it's home to at least 10 industrial plants, according to the parish's website, including plants operated by DuPont and Shell. According to the 2010 census, about 22,000 people live in the parish, more than half of them minorities. About a fifth of the population also lives below the poverty line. So, more broadly, St. James Parish is situated along a stretch of the Mississippi that's known as Cancer Alley. The area was previously known as the Petrochemical Corridor because of its high density of oil refineries and other treatment plants, but in the 80s received the Cancer Alley nickname as a result of the abnormally high rates of cancer cases in the area. The Louisiana Offshore Oil Port, or Loop, is the single largest point of entry for crude oil in the United States and takes in more than 1 million barrels of crude oil every day. Essentially, oil tankers from all over the Gulf of Mexico drop their oil off at the Loop, which stores 50 million barrels of oil, and then pipelines send that oil to facilities along the Mississippi. So that's why there are so many oil facilities along the river, which St. James Parish is smack in the middle of. Here I tried to set the borders on EJ screen to include as much of the St. James Parish as possible. It's not letting me move my mouse around, but the black border, the black dotted border, is the parish. You can see from these graphs that they're pretty clear there's some major problems going on here. The EJ screen area I selected ranks in the 95th to 100th percentile nationwide for the National Aerotoxics Assessment Cancer Risk Indicator, meaning that the risk of getting cancer here, according to the NATA, is greater than in 95 to 100% of places across the U.S. The Respiratory Health Index, as well, ranks at the 90th to 95th percentile, while the Wastewater Discharge Index ranks at the 80th percentile. So the health indexes do not look very good for St. James Parish, but also the demographic indexes say that the parish is in the 66th percentile of risk when it comes to the minority population, the 60th in low-income population, and the 71st percentile of less than high school education. Overall, St. James Parish ranks above average for almost every single environmental, demographic, and environmental justice indicator, and some of these indexes, like the cancer risk and respiratory health indicators, are extremely high. This is an image of the Shell oil refinery in Convent St. James, which is the parish seat, just to illustrate how huge this one factory is. And there are 12 factories like this just within St. James Parish, and they're all located within a few miles of residential neighborhoods. According to the EPA, oil refineries are known to emit toxins such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxide, methane, carbon monoxide, and others, which are associated with respiratory problems like asthma and bronchitis, birth defects, and especially cancer, mostly leukemia. In our first reading of the semester, Robert Bullard's From Civil Rights to Black Lives Matter, we learned about what he called the PIBBY effect, or Place in Blacks' Backyards policy, which illustrates a trend of placing environmentally harmful sites in primarily black communities. That trend has continued in St. James Parish, as 85% of reported air pollution in the parish is produced by factories located in primarily black census districts. The biggest organization fighting for the environmental health of St. James is the Louisiana Bucket Brigade, which has worked with a number of communities along Cancer Alley to advocate for public health causes in neighborhoods near oil refineries and other polluting plants. The Bucket Brigade takes its name from an air sampling system that's been in use since 1995. It was actually commissioned by the lawyer from the Aaron Brockovich movie about the gas company that dumped wastewater in California. According to the Bucket Brigade's website, community members of St. James would call the refineries in town and complain about the odor or the smoke, but management would just tell them that nothing harmful was released. Since they felt their right to know about harmful chemicals in their community wasn't being respected, They use these buckets, which are fitted with non-reactive plastic bags, to capture air and ship it to laboratories to get evaluated. Using the bucket method, an air quality test costs about $500, which seems really expensive, but is much more affordable than the $2,500 it would cost with professional equipment. With proof that toxic pollutants were present in the neighborhood, community members are able to, for example, legally challenge polluting corporations that are involved with the EPA. More locally to St. James, a group called Rise St. James operates to raise awareness about both health issues and racism, often sponsoring marches and holding vigils for community members who they suspect have died from issues related to the plants in their neighborhood. According to Sharon Levine, who founded Rise St. James, cancer is extremely common there. In an op-ed, she said, this is a quote, "I have autoimmune hepatitis and aluminum on body. My grandchildren have breathing problems, and when they're outside playing for any period of time, they develop rashes." One of the biggest projects Rise St. James and the Bucket Brigade have undertaken recently is protesting the construction of a $9.4 billion plastics factory, proposed by a Taiwanese company called Formosa, which would occupy 2,400 acres of wetlands and would nearly double the concentration of pollutants released in St. James. Additionally, a graveyard containing the remains of enslaved people from a nearby plantation was found on the planned construction site. According to Sharon Levine, the construction of the Formosa plant constitutes a form of racism. In a quote, she linked it to the ongoing discussion of racism in the U.S., saying, this is another quote, "It took George Floyd a few minutes to die. His life was shortened faster than ours. Ours is shortening slowly but surely. If Formosa comes, it's going to shorten faster." The battle over the proposed Formosa plant is a clear example of the precautionary principle as outlined in the Morello-Fresh et al.'s Environmental Justice and the Precautionary Principle reading, since the impact of the factory on the health of the environment and community is unknown, and citizens argue it would ultimately have a negative impact on their lives. To exercise the precautionary principle in this instance and mitigate possible harm would be to cancel the construction. I'm just going to show a promotional video the Louisiana Bucket Brigade posted in this effort to stop the Formosa plant from being built that they put out about a year ago. You're also going to see Sharon Levine, who I was just talking about in this.
It's absolute madness to continue to add more plants in St. James Parish. It goes with that old saying, continue to do stupid things over and over and expecting a different result. This company, Formosa, does not have a good record for operating in other places like Texas and Vietnam.
The Formosa Plastics Corporation is facing over $121,000 in state fines for polluting a tributary of Lavaca Bay.
Thousands of demonstrators swarmed the Formosa steel plant in central province of Hainan on Sunday. Taiwan conglomerate Formosa Plastics polluted more than 125 miles of coastline back in April.
I've been living in St. James all my life. If Formosa is built in St. James, we are not going to be able to breathe the air, and we'll die off one at a time.
They have a long track record of violating environmental laws.
This plant is going to be the biggest polluter in the South. It come in a place that's already polluted.
If Formosa moves in here, the property value will decrease.
I bet you the CEO of this plant is not going to live here.
I don't think it's fair to the small businesses, and I'm a small business in St. James.
The only thing I regret is I did not try hard enough to keep Formosa out.
If I have anything to do with it, it's not coming here. We are going to stop Formosa.
To the people who live here, to say, hey, the polluter we're bringing in is going to pollute more than the 12 plants we already have here combined. This is scary.
These are our lives. These are our children. It's our future. So we should do something about that.
So far, it looks like the Formosa plant is still going to be constructed, although they did delay construction for at least a few months because of COVID. There's also a legal challenge being fought against the Formosa plant because of the aforementioned graveyard. Formosa clearly wants to build their factory at any cost, and while the citizens of St. James don't want them to, the Louisiana government has hailed the factory construction as a major win, since it would provide permanent jobs for the state. In fact, you saw in the video that the state government was giving the proposed factory tax breaks. The work that Rise St. James and the Bucket Brigade has done is a perfect example of an embodied health movement. In one of our class readings, Phil Brown et al.'s Embodied Health Movements, EHMs are defined as having three characteristics. They insert the biological body into social movements. We see this in Rise St. James, which advocates for both health and racial issues and uses the phrase, "I can't breathe," which has deep meaning both in terms of public health issues and the Black Lives Matter movement. Second, they challenge the ways science and medicine define these experiences. This is obvious in the way that St. James community members judge the science of oil refinery emissions based on their own first-hand knowledge of their bodies and illnesses. Doctors didn't tell Cher and Levine that her autoimmune hepatitis, or tell the community their abnormal cancer rates were caused by toxic emissions. They made those conclusions themselves. In the op-ed I mentioned before, Levine specifically says, "Emissions from the Formosa factory would include ethylene oxide, a toxic chemical that causes cancer like non-Hodgkin lymphoma, leukemia, and breast cancer, and that Formosa's plant would be the third largest emitter of ethylene oxide in the country." That's a claim that definitely blurs lines between citizens and science. Third, EHMs collaborate with scientists and health professionals. And we see this from the Bucket Brigade, in that they collaborate with laboratories to test the air samples they collect, and use that data in legal arguments challenging the petrochemical industry. The St. James movement also definitely involves a politicized illness identity, since members of the community have come together to identify with their health issues and have linked them to broader social critique, as Brown mentions, in this case, indicting racism and the petrochemical industry as the source of their collective illness experience. Here you can see Rise St. James members marching with a Black Lives Matter sign that references Amendment 5, a proposed measure that would lower taxes for the petrochemical industry, mixing together public health and anti-racist messaging. And these are just my citations